Emily, I only have your Binghamton email, so if y'all want other emails in the chain, you should give them to me. Yeah, okay, Bing and Jeff. And one and Jeff. Oh my God, this is devastating. Jeff, I'm so sorry. I don't have your email. Could I get it in the chat? And then I will. Okay, oh, wait, Bing, gotcha. See, this is why I should just use my Binghamton email for debate. Then I wouldn't have this problem. Okay, cool. And I'll put the one I see in the new doc as well. Maybe, why is this doing this to me right now? Okay, I'll just add a new one. All right, the new doc is sent. My computer just had a little bit of an adventure trying to make that happen, but we got there. So can I get thumbs up from judges and Mish to make sure that we're good to go? Yeah, I figure at this point, I hope.
Oh, so is this doc different?
No, they're exactly the same doc.
Okay.
I just added the email chain. Yeah. Although that'd be a crazy surprise. Like, surprise, I changed the entire one I see. Who knew? It's a policy app now. Okay. Last call, stop me if you're not ready. The water is so clear that animals can draw it forth. All is exact or brought to life on stage, not far from human understanding, or under the scythe, under the ashes, under the residues. Striated muscles innervate the overturned ground. The water itself is innervated by the terms of evil, and nothing is separated. All is exact like blood under the nails, and so alternate. Imagine things that contain their own emptiness, where shines immersed like a chair, the gestural sword of the sun. The tale of American alliances is the tale of globalization, a fantasy of seamless technological control through information networks. The relationship between American culture and the global follows a move to eliminate difference through the assimilation into the Enlightenment universal. The symbolic system of globalization necessitates the production of meta-level extinction events against difference in Afghanistan or Africa as a means of tracking down the terrorists, the savage, or the irrational. This process of conversion renders terrorism a staple within post-modernity, self-justifying the dominant system. The worst defeat such a system can face is its own humiliation. Cipher, do not decipher, work over the illusion, create illusion to create an event, make enigmatic what is clear, render unintelligible what is only too intelligible, make the event itself unreadable. That's Baudrillard in 03. Terrorism, not a project matter, is the part of globalization, universalization, attitude of human rights, liberty, globalization, biotechnology, the market, tourism, and information, globalization, appears to be irreversible, universalism is on its way out. Any culture that becomes universalized, what happened to the culture be destroyed, it is true of our own culture, their culture, happy, their singularity, which is beautiful death. We are dying because we're losing our singularity and discriminating values. It is a trend to 0 degree, this is the human rights expansion, realist point of expression, universalization is vanishing because of globalization. What is globalized first, the market for pornography, human rights circulate exactly the beginning of the global project, passion from the universal to the global, human rights to commoditization, fragmentation. Discrimination, exclusion, globalization, logical outcomes, globalization give rise to perfectly indifferent cultural cultures, replace universal concepts of screens and now resist bullshit with critical negativity, open door to the violence of global characterized by the supremacy of technical efficiency, total organization, violence global, puts an end to social role of an intellectual, but in the role of the activist. This is where the violence from the global comes from, system tracks any form of negativity, including death, puts an end to violence, self tries to establish a world and accumulated to the natural business be removed by contagion, proceeds by chain reaction, destroys our being system, our capacity to resist. Globalization is not one who can defeat the global system, certainly not the amplified globalization movement, symbolic impact of birthless movements. Oppositions like more than internal model singularities are neither positive or negative, can't singularities represent a difference of all order. They do not abide by value adjustments or political regularities. They cannot be regularized. They defeat any uniquely dominant thought. They create their own given imposed rules, not a singularities of violence and linguistic. Terrorism can be violent. The singularity of terrorism event is the singularities of those cultures pay the price of extinction. The image of the West has used all available means of subjugate every culture to equivalence. Once a culture has lost its values, equivalency, revenge force, such one in Afghanistan, but normalizing. Excuse me. Savagery to colonize and domesticate the wild territory. The establishment of the global system resulted in intense jealousy, jealousy of indifferent and low definition culture, and culture with a high definition of a disintuited intensified system against the high intensity cultural environments and the sacralized society and sacrificial forms according to the dominant system. Any reactionary form is virtually terrorist, having the similar effect to destabilization of Afghanistan. Against women, democratic view, more not acceptable for the reword, not only analysis to emphasize the logic of the symbolic obligation makes sense of conversation with the global and sacred to understand. The hatred of the Western world against the Western perspectives and the view of the hatred on Western people is not based on the fact that the West hold everything, rather based on the fact they receive everything, whenever allowed to give anything back. The hatred is not caused by dispossession or isolation, rather by humiliation, precisely on hatred that explains September 11 terrorists attack the worst. The number of the global powers not to be attacked or destroyed, but suffer humiliation. Terrorists inflicted something global system cannot get back. Military reprisals will only mean a physical response, not a September 11 global power was symbolically defeated war is a response to aggression, but not a symbolic challenge. Symbolic challenges have been removed when they have the humiliating return the fundamental rule of symbolic obligation to be the basic of any form of domination to the absence of counterpart return. This is the principle of culture. American alliance commitments live and die within Disneyland, simulated prospects for the nation state development that only make sense within their own self-referential framework. The communicative model of status quo error and communicative theory relies upon the production of simulation states caricatures of responsible actors that merely serve as a proxy for mediatized representations. Alliance commitments as such only make sense within a self-referential echo chamber of the simulacra that validates their own reality principle through the projection of simulation and seduction. Our thesis is that the basis of critique must begin with the unit of the nation state itself as a progenitor of withdrawal and commitment discourse. In the phase of debate's investment into this Disneyland, we posit the question whether the nation, that's Caneva and 18. Simulation versus utopia equivalence from the radical negation, sign value, assumption, activities, and systemic manipulation, side process, simulation, release, operation of mass media, simulation model, communication, including reciprocity, antagonism, interlopers, implies a new form of social control. The new simulation forces through media, American popular culture, and Disneyland provides a social world dominated by simulation. When simulation model, the main motive signification, mere concealing back the real is not like real. Marxists pretty lose the purpose of reality principles. What? National leaders are defending when they insist on national entities, manufactured authenticity of the nation, grants legitimacy, the power to articulate its realist circular process convinces the reality of the social side of the operations of the capital from a real simulation of a national brand as some proponents or opponents of national branding accept its claims as operating representational over the perpetuated reality. Facts and products are simulation nations exist in operation. The media are mediated of signification of the nation regardless of form of simulation nation mediated commodity science prime material for the simulation nations circulate through networks by simulation nations contradicted bullrats. Glorious nation causing tennis pieces of wheels are corrupt, causing him from the Wall Street Journal and a royal, which causing him from the economist Ruslan created a media spectacle appeal to Western audiences using simulacra of authenticity. Simulation nations plugged into the operation of the media through the production of the media audiences need to be continually seduced by media science. Simulation nations also imagined, but also imagined primarily for the benefit of media audiences who are located outside the nations. Imagined by mayors of commodity science whose main credentials are in the media and promotion, expertise, and manipulation of science, highly valued system maneuvers of audience seduction more so than familiarity with historical or cultural legacies. The seduction stands for the play of appearances which prevent the existence of transparent reality. Controls a mirage given by the multiplicity of media commodity science of urban nations, enabling a new system of media control proliferation. Simulacra results in a state of hyperreality where it's no longer possible to distinguish between the real and simulation. You feel the top seat in the general assembly, lobster taking between the real and simulated, and you can create a crisis for power. Power means the real is a guarantor in order to maintain position proliferation of its origin, science, reality, second truth. Invention of national myth origin was particularly important in the case of Kosovo, a guarantee for realness, the new nation, and its right to self-determination used to become a nation state. Kosovo was prohibited from using ethnic symbols. Local media provided a repertoire of recognizable symbols. Newborn simulacra was irresistibly seduction to a global media culture obsessed with use and devoid of memory. The global system of integral reality is one premise on the elimination of death and the production of all life to mere survival. Surveillance is never anything but the imposition of order, utility, life, and reason on the shadowy negative space of death. And he said of values that might lead to an event that might take place in a manner not ideologically pre-coded by power must be preempted. Enter the Iraq War and the elimination of all deathly mystery of Islamic culture from the Middle East. Everything is a threat that cannot be controlled, known, and predicted by integral power. And these allegedly uncivilized objects are rendered deathly. This is the Fourth World War, a planetary civil war in which potential to all are potential terrorists and potential agents of death. Even protests against the Iraq War did not change the attempt to stave off death on mystery and contain the world within information. Yet death lurks in this hyper-positivistic system. The system incessantly claiming competition and closure, and death alone provides us hope. The system of global military preemption premise on its completeness, yet this is where and when it generates its own auto-destructivity, presuming completion. The system lashes out against itself as in the Iraq War, losing face the post-Cold War presumption of America's power, complete dominance, its own undoing, without an outside to lash out against. Life itself reverts death. Only death operates simultaneously inside and outside the system. Death is that which the system hopes to grasp, yet that which it cannot stave off, that which it simply cannot. Death is that which we attempt yet cannot simulate or model, yet which all simulations and all models are premised on attempting to know. Death is the unpredictable vote app to take a side in the infinite global civil war being fought over the modalities of life itself. The global deterrence apparatus is premised on making everything live, everything mean, everything signify. We affirm commodities radically other cry death to America. That is an understanding of death outside the binarization of life and death proffered by Eurocentric ways of encountering that threshold. We should meet the production of death with a critical project that reverses death itself, pointing out the death in life. That's Bishop in 09. The audience Iraq War, when his political action no longer accessible to the non-screen reason system by integral reality, we're dealing with the exercise of power and local sovereignty, representation, relation, simulation, universal values, democracy, neoliberal economic markets, etc. Globalization tends to be perfectly only good on its own. All the singular and irreducible must be reduced into script demands on the LC fear from the script and integral reality. Anything is regarded as terrorism system generated its own mode of destruction. Anything that impedes integral reality is obliterated. You just make it integral reality possible, rendered impossible to achieve, and undesirable to do so. Does not provide space for co-option, reclamation, deaths, impervious, making it radical, attractable, usable. Death is both internal to the system is radical banality. Death operates both within and without the system under security. Apparatus the Cold War was erected and launched toward off death on the scale of the nature of gods. Rational order can explain or contain anything threatens at death. Destabilize all different order to make stable. If events not remaining in the model, use the accident or find the simulation techniques. Does the salvation theory argument that salvation that death has been removed in America leaves its existence like that a zombie savior legend epic to balance that salvation of death. Threads with the means to resist nihilism built into the projects that have rendered politics and subject object theory and simulation. Any investment into tropes of international legitimacy and sovereignty ultimately contributes to the production of simulation nations. International institutions are empty void gatekeepers of nothing more than a faux imaginary of their own sovereignty. This makes possible the orbital direction of interventionist violence across the map of the globe that's Catherine 12. Because everyone to the authority will come a united community for peace, willing to investigate their fellow being liberal version of popular sovereignty will of political legitimacy, state acting, and behavioral norms against for security of individual state is vested with the duty to interpret charter civilization. The content of the two will remain ambiguous and necessitates customary script of the difference by various non-coordinated practices, understanding legitimacy, the legality of the laws, mechanisms, social proposed, and other disciplinary trends that maximize positive feedback, minimize or forward in the future using governance tactics, relying on freedoms and means, letting the statute of normals be defining what normal is, everything done to use the truth as unquestioned security offered by the social contract relies on anticipatory production. The economic expectation of individuals' legitimacy applies specific theological content, valuing individuals free from political violence and precondition for economic self-development is normal. Subject to leads any kind of legitimate position, treatments, law codes, or surgical interventions, discipline to correct deviance and social patience. Impossible to speak in the name of international media. No audience pre-exists or reproduced discourse that for individuals' opportunities one allow materialization interventions, how to save off the meaning of sovereignty to simulate interpretive community, the actions of virtualism made communities say what we want to hear. The underlying ideas of reproduction. Reproduction of the limited state where legitimate threats must come from the outside. You can mark the card at legitimate threats must come from the outside. I don't know where that went. Hold on.
I was also marking the card. Sorry, that took a hot second.
No, it's okay. That's what I'm also marking the card.
For sure. Are you good to start?
Yeah, let me just sit down and then I will be good to go. All right. I am open for cross.
Okay. The poem is pretty fine, although I don't know what I'm supposed to do with it. So what's the purpose of the poem?
The purpose is that you don't know what you're supposed to do with it. We didn't write it, but it's a poem that lacks meaning intentionally to inject mystery and an enigmatic like illusion into the debate, to use the form of language to resist itself.
So does the nag to even be competitive in this debate also need to read a poem to inject mystery?
Not necessarily.
Okay.
Would
you go ahead.
No.
You can criticize our methodology of like symbolic terrorism and our poetic affirmation of language as well.
Why is the poem symbolic terrorism?
So
yeah,
okay.
Okay. I love it.
Yeah.
Okay, so we've explained symbolic terrorism as a singularity in which like the global is given a gift that can't be returned. So like when the cry "Death to America" was uttered, it was a symbolic humiliation because the United States could not respond with a similar singularity,
Wait, hold on.
but only
One
with
second.
intervention.
No part of the poem is like "Death to America." Like I get like the "Death to America" phrase in the advocacy statement, but like I'm saying, why is the poem symbolic terrorism? Just so because the world can't give the gift back?
Poetry is a way of thinking through language that doesn't elucidate transparency or seek like a one-to-one correspondence.
Got you. That makes sense to me. Alliances are globalization. It seems like free trade agreements are like actual tales of globalization. I guess what makes defense pacts synonymous with globalization?
Tell us where we said defense pacts. Like,
well, yeah, like the resolution. Hold on. The resolution is about defense pacts. You should say alliances generally. So I'm asking, like, what part of the defense pact is bad?
So I guess like our argument is that like defense pacts are part of the project of globalization as America tries to secure the international order and
that makes sense.
Can and cannot like determine the viability of a nation's culture.
Okay, so like, do you get rid of all alliances? Do you get rid of states?
I mean,
I think we eliminate the essential logic by which an alliance can be created because the affirmative is a process of revealing the nation state as a simulacra.
So hold on, what is the essential object of alliance creation?
Right, like the idea that like we should begin our approach to IR with the unit of the nation state. Our Castinger evidence says that that's bad because it instills them.
So you get rid of the nation state.
We've argued that the nation state never existed in the first place.
So then what do you eliminate if it doesn't exist?
The attempt to impose order, meaning, rationality, language.
The illusion of reality and the like built integral reality that creates a global war against death.
Hold on. I just want to get this clear because there's 10 seconds left. Voting AF eliminates the attempt by anyone to impose order.
By nation states.
Okay, by nation states to impose order. Okay, thank you.
Oh, that's an unfortunate noise. All right, cool.
Okay, I'm going to send it out. It will be 2 in case. If I could just get a confirmation whenever people get it, but I just sent it out.
I've got it.
Okay. And then Binghamton has it, the other judges. Okay, good spot. Cool. First off, they double turned themselves. They should have read the poem and sat down. The rhetorical connection between poetry and exploratory theory terribly destroys the effectiveness of both. Vodeg to affirm either the poem without the rest of the 1AC or the rest of the 1AC without the poem without a plain text. They have the word to prove to justify everything in the 1AC. We should win even if they can't prove why both the poem and the cards are necessary. Kennedy and 17. The strange that Kennedy is here. They are not subsumed within a general theory, which would immediately diminish the feeling. The anesthetic effects of the theory always petrify the sovereign power of the work. The separation between artistic and the political realm needs to be made more trenchant. Any attempt at a fusion would endlessly comprise art freedom to celebrate incoherence. It should never be expected to create blueprints against a concern for the future. Poetry is defined by the present moment. Political action is always guided by the concern for the future, which is a rational concern. Every work of art is always against rational utility. It would be a mistake to enlist the immediate nature of poetry to combat unreasonable conditions, as it always requires a sober analysis of those conditions devoid of the effusive power to apply art to politics and constitute a disservice to both realms. It denies the opaque dimension of the artwork and reduces the latter to a service rendered to infuse politics with a heterogeneous, precludes a clear-headed and rational appraisal of the real conditions of social life, which is the prerequisite for any meaningful attempt to bring about political change. And next off, interpretation and violation. 1. Alliance agreements or formalized treaty. Any extra legal action doesn't meet standard and clause 66. Alliance agreement, the variable rule summarize treaties, recoded treaties into 3 costs of defense pact, neutrality pact, the entente, only alliance and foreign written treaties, conventional agreements were included. We have found that written alliances has been meaningful, rarely entered into lightly excluded war security arrangements and unilateral guarantees such as American protection. 112 alliances met our criteria and substantially limits means immediate and material, not hypothetical potential. O'Connor in 99. We conclude to be evaluated in the hypothetical state to be impermissible because substantially limits appears in the present verb form. We think the language is of read as requiring presently, not potentially or hypothetically limited to demonstrate only where limits may not where it might or could or would be limiting if measures were not taken, and under which refers to legal documents. Curse 97. It refers to legal document because under which supports the view the use of under rather than with or through suggests Congress meant to formal documents that confine operation rather than routine by with which by being a plan conducts operation under which is a clear and unambiguous under which encompasses legal documents and our impact is debatability. 2. Internal links versus limits. About a topics that are predictable status point for debate that guarantees thematic coherence. Absent defined limits debates competitive incentives creates a race to the margin that distorts topic research. 2. Is ground of predefined controversy ensures a vibrant limp base and in-depth clash, but it's unreasonable to prepare for alternative frameworks with the ground allocated to us by the parameters of the resolution. All the 2AC defense to this claim will rely on a concessionary ground, which isn't a stable basis for a year debate. The T has a rule of the game, and T's role of the game may resemble the world of transparency, but only the thing that makes the two materially equivalent. The ideological investment in T's ability to do violently espouse they return the AF at the level of form because even if they win the content of the 1AC radical voting AF requires agreeing with the assumption that following the rules is worse than breaking them, but the act of transgression gains satisfaction from violating the system and indicts its revised coherence to the system. You can't make the rules of debate less insidious by playing the game just because the act of playing itself affirms the game brings the rules to life. You should vote negative because considering debate as simply a rule guiding game divests the rules without any authority, but that way which we granted this is a better way of exposing the contradictions of dominant power outside the debate. Their link can't outweigh this link term because topicality can't have a violent force of law if we vacate the driving ideology behind it. Berg and 11. Lesson for social regulated law consists not only of norms and carries justification. The law tells us not only what we should and should not do, it also tells us why the rule game and the rules are characterized by arbitrariness. The rules are purely imminent to the game. The rule does not give reasons why they should follow. The rule of the game is independent of voluntary submission to the law, plays a crucial role in the constitution of the subject law. Its institutes are desires in the first place. When the law tells us not to do this or that, it carries an underlying fantastic message promising that beyond the prohibition of the law, the object that may satisfy the desire inherent is the fantasy of what if the law was not their desire can ask to be constructed. It should be the role of fantasy. We live within the law, even when fantasizing against the abolition of this court of law. Determine the inverse towards transition. The game moves beyond the ideological domain of the law. The world does not hold a promise of satisfaction. Entering the game means voluntarily submitted to the arbitrary rule with no longer high. I mean, this is delivering oneself to the law transition and caught in the law that its major satisfaction and unsatisfaction may contradict the explicit word of law, but we are still affirming its confirming its principle. We choosing to submit to the rules. We renounce our desire by letting ourselves be seduced into order by not promising any satisfaction. We move beyond the law. We have no illusion that the game is nothing but an illusion of none. Neither believes it nor disbelieves the rule. One deserves a desire suspending, then so is unsatisfaction in the law. We might find particular satisfaction through obtainment of a different object. The joy of the game comes not from this, but from suspension. People playing games because it is fun rather than providing a full explanation. Fun seems to be the mark of limitation of explanation. Fun resists interpretation. The subject can find satisfaction in missing the object, that's big thing that winning is losing. That one, it would be contradictory to project intentionality into the game. The rules function as a paradoxically accurate of law on an immediate level. The rules look like the law. The rule lacks a fantastic supportive ideology. Though a game presents a rule as a naked arbitrariness, the game may transform a view of the particular law, and distraction of ideology may make us aware of the ideological dimension of law, causing us to view the law in the same naked arbitrariness as the rule. The rule mimics the law. It does not pretend to be the law. It knows neither repression, the absence of justification, transcending the rule to produce a vacuum around the game. The game does not explain itself. It merely offers itself. The game does not pass judgment on the law. However, the vacuum produced by the rule of ideology opens the potential for critical reflection. These cannot be made from within the game. The game merely opens the space. And case. Presumption A, vote negative. They haven't met the burden of proof. Kalani already said death to America, and Michigan KM affirmed in debate 5 years ago. They already performed the 1AC, so the ballot is not key. They're either inherent or neither inherent nor solvent. B, this uniquely turns case symbolically, reaffirming their method despite lack of ties to material resistance, strengthens power of Echoes and Law 9. Every disposition fails to tell us more about than what we already know and ignores the material condition powerlessness has learned out of accumulated fatality and entrapment, arguing against celebrating resistance that fail to alter broader relation of material conditions is recognizing the existence of a powerful group do not differentiate accounts of everyday resistance do not differentiate between practices that reproduce and alter power might involve pressing that power to become more adapted in domination or dominate differently or precluding alternative acts that would challenge it. It's necessary to do more than to speak to power. It must be to also be demonstrated that such acts add up to broader changes of resistance provoking refinements of practices. It confronts critique those analysis ends up whose analysis ends up producing non-compliance helps power work better, and communication and interpretation are possible and inevitable. Quirk in 17. While there might be some quixotic persuading to some persuading the stubborn is timid to avoid the task of solid pragmatic case, it can be made that objectivity, fact, and truth are live force and a momentous option that can be given a successful defense. A defense pragmatic rather than theoretical can be defended on the same grounds as an nihilist, even if it armed with alternative facts. Distinction between the truth and justification rooted in practice and making claims, defending and withdrawing when baseless. Discourse invariably involves in order to distinguish valid from invalid moves and enable participants to track and evaluate those moves as better or worse. Discourse centers around scorekeeping, employing shared practical norm to assess commitments we hold ourselves and others responsible for commitments laid by determining whether we are entitled to them, whether moves pass muster with the norms. Such norms are built shared. If you want to talk to make sense, you have to be organized and honor these. You can't just make shit up and don't make them let them gaslight you. There's no time to get wobbly with the truth. They are still meaningful because discord does not get off on the ground without them. The post-truth regime with the mirage, the emperor is no closer. Do not give more power by fearing that truth is lost its resonance as a view objectivity, not as a given, but as something one must achieve. And giving and taking reasons one needs to be cultivated as a disposition that take normative scorekeeping seriously, hold every foot to the fire by showing one is entitled to believe one claim. Discourse it's guided by the need for inferential consistency and relevance, and shame when one deliberately fails to honor that or to accept them as gospel without putting them up to good reason or shutting up. It is not to play the game by different rules. It is to refuse to play at all. That is an ethical failure. And nation states and sovereignty are the most ethical paradigm for international relations. They accept the inherent insecurity of nuclear age, a precondition for genuine hospitality. Rejecting sovereignty and borders causes liberal interventionism, global nuclear civil war. Lomberg in 19. Russia highlights the importance of finitude of grasping life. This affirms the life chance to live only a condition that inherent. It is a risk of the end. And then refusing with this would be refusing to live. This makes it impossible to know if today's friend will say a friend or turn into an enemy. For a cry of full knowledge to survival will lose its value. Life turns into a calculable formula. Ethic cannot be a static. Hospitality cannot be pure of conforming to a static ideal that is such an impossible to achieve, undesirable. It offers warning against any attempt to immunize the good from the bad. Ethics is tied to affirmation of uncertainty. It is ethics fits within the anarchic system and desire to survive. Neoliberalism does not close down the ethic by formulating ideals, informing states how they should act or how they ought to be friends rather than enemies. No states can offer absolute hospitality. Is not self the friendship over enmity. It's better if the system eradicates borders would be a world civil war. The possibility of war means states will always be wary of provoking others to moderate demands and serve as an incentive for settlement of disputes. It is this incalculably that anarchy affirms if it embraces understands not as explanatory, but that it makes it possible for states to make ethical decisions. Any attempt to challenge neoliberalism must do so by replacing one survival with another. No guarantees. The new structure will be less violent. The new community that transcends attempt will not result in more violence. Will result in more violence of fascist discourse. Far more violent will emerge. The common goal that embraces everybody everywhere undesirable, not because of the ideal it's not because the ideal is bad. It is the absence of the common goal beyond segregating borders that make ethical possible. We only have to keep alive anarchy only if catastrophe remains real. Will states need to deter threat? What creates a nuclear war constitutes condition of the peace. What makes apocalyptic discourse raise the stake even further by pointing to the definitude of everything that lives. Universal ethical ideas and the condition that make life possible. Nuclear war means that there is no metaphysical truth to which it can or should conform. It means that there is always space and time for negotiation. And reversing death collapses in on itself, reifies the violence of modernity. Brassier and 10. If you're accelerating the material constraints, there also must be transitional must be limit. The ultimate limit is death, because death is inherently productive. The claim that you can have a moment of convergence in absolute intensity. What is this? Who would be the bearer? What vehicle would continue to exist to be the bearer of this? Acceleration, not the human species. Certainly, the process demanding the elimination of humanity, a fundamental contradiction. How can you intensify when there is no longer anything left to intensify? There comes a point at which there is no agency left. You have enough dissolve back into this process. A human subject cannot position itself vis-a-vis this process is happening without you. Anyone doesn't need you. The very concept of agency is stripped out. The paradox is, under what condition could you will the impossibility of willing? How could you affirm that which the incapacity of all information is the political valence of radical ultra-left anarchists? Mark the card of radical ultra-left anarchism. I'm good for Cossacks. Let me set up a timer. Okay, good to go.
Sorry, one sec. I'm marking the card in my doc.
It was at radical left.
Ultra left.
Anarchism.
So we're not the last two references. Okay, cool. And I'm gonna grab okay, first question. So what is the status of the K?
Conditional.
Okay. So you said communication and interpretation are possible and inevitable, but are they objective? And if so, how?
We haven't made the argument that they're objective. We understand that humans create language and meanings subjectively, but rather that can be like socially motivated and socially culminated in shared meanings. And that's how humans are able to communicate with each other and communicate ideas in the first place.
Okay, so you're saying that language works for communication, but you are not actually claiming that. Never mind, it's okay. Well, I'm sure we'll get there in the round. What is a game?
I think Thomas could probably better answer this. We think it's just like an arbitrary activity in which there's like a winner and a loser. Yeah.
Okay.
Deuces.
So if it's arbitrary, then what's the
or rather
point
the rules are arbitrary, and that's the entire jerk evidence, which is just an indication that buying into a rule is fun, and we recognize that going beyond that rule doesn't really have sort of intrinsic value, but rather that the rule just sets up like a creative limitation.
Okay, so following rules is fun, and this is a good model because the people who make the rules are always right, and this won't lead to like.
Yeah, that's obviously not what we're saying. This
I
is
mean,
kind
like,
of like a silly argument. No.
I mean, you can call it
no.
silly, but you're proposing a model, right?
No, we also aren't proposing a model. Like our argument is we have an impact ability.
It's just
I think Thomas could better answer that. I mean, I guess so, but Thomas gets to explain the framework.
Nothing spills up or spills out of this round, so models of debate don't make a lot of sense. It's only about what happened in this debate.
Yeah.
Okay. So so the rules are things like compliance with the topic. So like, who writes the topic?
We think the community gets a little bit of involvement in producing the topic, and then a committee does. But the point is not that the topic is good because it's true, or that the rules are good because they're true, but rather they're good because they're arbitrary. And following arbitrary rules is a way to transcend beyond sort of belief in law as like an overarching control and correct control of our lives.
Absolutely no way how that understanding of rules could be violent to anyone at any point.
You haven't articulated why.
No, I don't need to. I'm just making sure that you're not going to do it for me.
What? I don't even understand what the purpose of your question other than ethos.
What is fun?
It can be like stuff. It can be basically anything that's enjoyed. It doesn't mean that all things that are enjoyed are good, but rather you have to prove a unique reason why enjoying this rule is bad. Or enjoying this activity is bad.
Enjoying the okay, sure. How do we evaluate that?
What do you mean? The jerk evidence just gives an internal link, and then that fun is produced by following those rules. I guess it's like a good thing because it's like pleasurable.
No, but
which
I mean,
think
like
Jared would say is good.
One of the like most historically problematic things in like the attack. Okay, never mind.
I don't even know what you're asking. Thank you.
Yeah, I didn't finish the question, so it's not shocking that you don't know what it was. Prep.
Okay, stop at 5:40. I'm sending the doc. 5:40 F. It should be sent. So it'll be case, then the poetry pick, and then topicality. Okay, can I get like thumbs up from people? Okay. Awesome. I think that was everyone. Okay. It's poetry, then TK. Cool. I'm starting in like 10 seconds. Stop me if I shouldn't.
The political economy of the science is the impact filter for every single argument they made in absence of competing interpretation for how the world functions. They cannot win this debate. Power no longer operates through the production of labor, but rather through the consumption of science and neutralization of resistance. Simulation states demand total productivity from all subjects to craft the illusion of progress, but you should know that the signifier and signified have disappeared like how Kazakhstan is simultaneously Barat's glorious nation, the Wall Street's corrupt oligarchy, and the economist oil-rich land international alliances are a simulacra of globalization which requires the other pay through extinction in a world of an imagined global community. In response, we affirm the cry, death to America. This symbolic terrorism is a strategy based on the material resistance of the Iranian Revolution. It was a move that challenged the paradox of modern power and proved the fragility of the system. Since the only response the U.S. could have against the Iranians who began this was intervention, which proves the fragility of the system, the reintroduction of excess, the rejection of the West project of perfection, and the resistance of nihilism. We have two impacts. First is exploitation. The universality of the consumer subject creates a split between two communities, those who control the means of signification and those who consume. Exploitation of productive labor has shifted to the exploitation of consumptive power, condemning populations to abandonment and obliteration, forcing to be customers, such as the creation of global trade policy. There are entire populations, the global north and south, whose labor is not necessary but forced into a position of constant consumption for survival. That's the reason why groceries are more expensive in the poor communities and in the suburbs. Second impact is neutralization. Politics that become impossible to articulate when it's posed in terms of an intelligible identity. The Black Lives Matter movement emerged in response to Ferguson was drowned out by All Lives Matter from white activists who brutally paved the way over black violence in America. Facebook is dominated by calls to transform feminism into egalitarianism. This isn't just co-option, but an inbuilt mechanism that subsumes all resistance. Politics that uses the register of identity are subsumed by the universalization of the consumer as subject. You become the client that's served, addressed, and sent away. Now, presumption first. We actually do something. Our evidence indicates that the acceleration of the form and content of nation simulations forces simulations to run toward its own death is necessary in reversing the citizen and consumer mindset, which creates the conditions for violent subjectivity in the first place. Also, evaluations of solvency are ultimately irrelevant. Cause and effect are entirely detached from reality, which means that it's only a question of opening up alternative modes of communication that debunk this model. You should affirm a performance of acceleration of their logic to the extreme. Second is the productivity DA. Their understanding of the ballot as saying that you have not worked hard enough or you not have done enough is the logic of utility, which our evidence says is based in the logic of racism and sexist violence against those bodies who are viewed as useless and didn't achieve their intended goals in society. You should refuse their logic since it falls prey to the teleological narrative that we've impact turned their argument about Turner's case is a first of all, this is a critique of Derrida. It doesn't reply to our understanding of death. Our argument is not that death has a productive value, but rather that we should point out the way in which the value to life creates value to death. Our affirmation of death is an affirmation of unknowability, it's an affirmation of decomposition, and those deathly forces that have been securitized against it in the global civil war. They say that rejecting borders causes liberal interventionism. Again, it doesn't assume the affirmative theory of simulacra. Our CEDA evidence says that we need to reject Baudrillard's anti-realism and apply his theory of simulacra to material circumstances, which proves that this doesn't apply. Also, is liberal interventionism is the quo, which means that there's only a risk the affirmative solves. Our death securitization DA is also an impact turn to this argument. That'll be on topicality. They say reversing death is inherently productive. No, that was answered above. Poetry. First, permutation do both. AF is a linguistic undercutting of semiocapitalist insistence on communicative transparency. That's Ron 14. Poetry falls outside the domain of work and underscores the relationship between language economy. IT might find different ways to think about working and living. Capitalist favors a coexistent relationship is seen parts by reducing words to definite functions as transparent vessel of communication. Poetry reestablishes access ambiguity captured by signifying process. Poetry scalar communication can be considered a counter economy taking place level of language counter position to science reduction of poetry and acts of language to get poetry gives linguistic surplus language has become a dominant material and organizational force of labor in the capitalist economy inexhaustible in all purpose for neoliberal creation of value capitalism so reliant on the semiotic model of neologisms and the semiocaps necessary to describe to the extent of complex network service communication knowledge production shape poetry's nexus of language enables to shift from one paradigm to works outside of capitalism prosaic narratives of production accumulation growth and self-interest poetry marks the fundamental singularity when capitalism beats cadence 21st century poetry's rhythms language poetry calls for semantic thinking takes place in the unpredictable domain where meaning naturalizes through temporary assemblages and exchanges under the economic which encourage produce fish social life has been reduced to the value producing tools poetic qualities opening spaces in which we garner activities rather than demanding we rise for production poetry asks us to plummet forth and distress us the radical precarious nature of the world and interpretation picks are only legit if they are just reasons to prefer picks justify 2AC add-ons that study abusive to negative to say whatever the answer block unpredictable offense for arguments voter for picks voter for fairness as picks move the original 1AC force debate to be in the rebuttals destroys ground encourages big gaps to avoid picks which end up killing all negative grounds to be impossible to pin us down with a viable unconditional picks are uniquely abusive make it impossible for the apps to gain any offense is uniquely problematic in a world where the app where we get said offense and neg is allowed to drop it whenever they want argumented responsibility they can say awful things and kick it when we call them out for it 4 is info cannibalism they can steal parts of the 1AC and when called out kick out of it well they aren't forced to commit to their speech our interpretation prevents this in the world where the pick is dispo the app has the ability to choose their offense which means there's no risk of 2AC stress or attempts to even when oppressor offense we still get to keep it reject the reason neg for the reason spoke because 2AC strat has already been skewed which is in round abuse those are voting issues now permutation to both the idea that they can pick and choose parts of the 1AC to reject and endorse is just another form of the imposition of meaning and reality onto all spaces which results in the violence that our app says is bad the argument that the poetry in the 1AC is only valuable if it wasn't with the rest of the 1AC destroys all sense of radical alterity and illusion which is necessary for solvency this means that the pick not only links to all of our offense that I did above on case debate but also can't solve any of our affirmative permutation to the pick at our form to their content now framework. This argument is just gaslighting, rejected on face. Y'all flip neg. The app was disclosed. Y'all had a buy in doubles and octos. Y'all had 2 entire days to write answers to one app while having access to the Michigan squad, and we sent you full text. They have no bright line for fairness or pre-round prep argument. They only weaponize their interpretation against small schools and debaters of color whose arguments they don't like. We maintain the illusion of the topic, deathly illusion of the topic, which decreases the confirmation bias of defense back between international legitimacy and death between and by the debate community. The app would have, in the app's world, the nation state is recognized as a simulacra, which means that there are no alliances. Their interpretation is not unique. The topic is dying. It's the last tournament at which will be debated last day. Our education about embracing death and non-knowledge in the face of simulated nation states is unique, while their interpretation should have resolved their concerns or never will. Counter-interpretation, the affirmative should engage in a discussion of the topic and how it implicates debate in ourselves. Permutation to both just that hour after their interpretation of the topic, the other debates solve their offense, but Binghamton AM is the only team that's making debate defend its very understanding of life. They also have to prove why, including our app is specifically about they read answers to Bozier, so we didn't make debate impossible. Their burden is so small in this debate. All they need to do is win that debate. Should be about reading plans and ameliorating suffering and death in the world is good. If they cannot do this, you should vote app on presumption because their moral debate has an educational experiment has totally and unequivocally failed as a securitizing death DA. Even if they're right about the normative best practices in debate, making their argument into a voting issue is precisely the attempt to securitize the exterior, which makes the survivalist society so violent today. Debate is not separate from the global system of control, surveillance, and preemption of all deathly unpredictable events that we call integral reality. All of their topical version and switch side arguments are nothing but the blackmail of semiotic conformity, which maintains the will to life and hyperfunctionality within this community. Even if they can produce skills or enjoyable games, those games will be premised on the attempt to eradicate uncertainty on the exterior, making them complicit in the unending global war, as in the war on terror. That's their bishop evidence. This will to predictability and life preservation is the root cause of all structural exclusions of racism, speciesism, ableism, sexism, and beyond. As everyone who does not adhere to the standard model of life has death painted onto them, this argument should be a prior ethical consideration to anything they say. That's our bishop evidence. Death is necessary for value life. They may win that there's limited value or fun to their model debate. Our poetic affirmation of death allows us to max out value life. Their vision of pre-planned debates terminates in a low intensity existence where if we win in order for anything to have full value, you have to be willing to risk this very destruction. You must vote affirmative because they simply have no value. Their pure evidence is a misapplication of Baudrillard. This evidence is about having constraints on whether or not you can leave the physical space of the game. T is a rule. T isn't a rule, and it isn't one of the rules that this evidence is talking about. Isn't about debate, and it also links to you because it says that the cheaters are the ones who pretend certain norms are actually rules. Constraints on debate based on location and time solve all of their offense. We maximize mystery, and within the rules of the game, it's inevitable. And our counter interpretation solve the fun debate gets decided on 3 central issues. First is that we're having fun. They have to win that their fun outweighs our fun, which causes a moral hazard that they say is so bad. 2 is that there's no bright line for what fun is or how much fun you need to have before you can be satisfied, which is the link to our technological rationality offense. 3rd is this their model kills value life. Unpredictability is the spice of life. Endless research against policy apps means that research burden is inevitable. 4th is that if they go for this, they can't go for any other argument in the 2 and R because it would double turn the idea that debate is arbitrary and that nothing spills up. That was Crossix. Now, there's also a resentment because their model of debate where people just read policy apps all the time will never come to a fruition. Even when they win rounds going for framework, people will still read chaos no matter what, and they cannot control what people do. This causes self-hatred, so we repeatedly perform a failing political project, knowing that it'll fail every time the impact is lashed out against black and queer debaters seen as threatening to their purified vision of debate. Vote affirmative to make them lose on this argument to stop this psychic violence. Now, even if just in this debate, rather than whitewashing the liberal curriculum's complicity and violence, you should prefer an injection of death and negativity as the only possible ethical act in this university anarchist news intent. Universities serve progressive research cannot detract from military research. Social conditioning serve as machine prostrate privilege. Hybrid education society can only exist by the exploitation of students who are taught to be oblivious. Liberals and are complicit in the destruction on a daily basis. Social deaths are accepted in the institution meaning for own lack meaning attempting to excel in university setting or enroll and yourself in necropolis rival to no other. We're studying in a cemetery nation which cultural fetish for death. Refuse to say that an absolute fixation with zombies. The event is the counter-effect to every system reintroduces death. There's no liberation system abolished by pushing it to its own hyperlogic. Students are insistent on saying alive in the university when their version of life and serve to ultimately makes life for living. Social death, passion for otherness, decidedification all relate, and our lives have been turned into the perpetuation of social death. Mark, anarchist news at perpetuation of social death.
Okay, I'm gonna set a timer. Are you good to go?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, I just had to pull it up, sorry. All right, on the poetry pick, the Rana evidence, where does this isolate that you need to discuss both the academic language and the poetry of the 1AC?
What are you talking about when you say the academic language in the 1AC and the poetry of the
I mean,
1AC?
just like, why does the Rana evidence isolate that you need to read anything below the Baudrillard poem you read at the top of the 1AC?
I mean, I think the entire 1AC was poetic.
Okay.
I think that your like attempt to delineate.
Yeah, that's fine. The pick stuff, what labor did you actually produce by this AF that was not produced by Michigan KM or your own coaches?
Plenty of it.
Like isolate what it is.
Why should I do that for you?
Well, it seems to, you have offense on Picks Bad that says we're stealing your labor. What's your labor about this AF?
Our Picks Bad offense wasn't stealing our labor, it was stealing the F.
Why is, okay, but the cannibalism, what's the offense to that then? If none of it
So
is something
that
you actually
argument
produce?
is like the form of conditionality creates an ethical system whereby we only care about tragedy in the world insofar as like it benefits us in debate.
So what's the impact to stealing? So that's the impact to stealing the AF, or?
That's the impact to y'all like not having to go for your advocacy.
Okay, but what's the impact to just like taking the AF and making it better, I guess, if you didn't produce any of the labor that went
We
into
don't
it?
think you made the F better in any way. In fact, we
Okay.
think like y'all have imposed a
fine.
little transparency onto the F.
I guess, what is the offense to the permutation if the Rana evidence says that poetry alone produces radical alterity?
What do you mean offense to the permutation?
Like, what's the net benefit?
Avoiding the will to transparency and death securitization, DA.
Like, what is the will to what about the pick doesn't avoid the will to
Y'all
transparency?
are like the poetry in the 1AC is only good if it exists without everything else we said.
Why is that the will to
Well,
transparency? Like,
It's
transparent is
definitely
making stuff
attempt to
known.
map
How does that make stuff
utility onto
known?
the poetry only. Yeah, like the attempt
you
to
haven't
create a
agreed.
delineation between like what creates meaning in the 1AC and what doesn't is our link argument.
What about the pick says something creates meaning and the other doesn't? Like, we're just saying that one is not good meaning and the other is like bad meaning.
What is one? It's all one. Like the AF is a singularity.
I guess, why read cards, why cite authors if you just think that like it's all one idea? Like, why can't you just say one part and sit down?
I mean, why not?
Okay, because the offense on the pick, goofy. The framework debate, I guess, like, what sort of ground does your interpretation of the topic allow us to read? Like, can you
Y'all
isolate a few
can-
examples?
Y'all can say alliances are good. Y'all can defend like, you can defend globalization. You can defend hegemony. You can defend capitalism. A lot of things you can do. You can critique the methodology of the AF.
Yeah, I got you.
Yeah.
Here, hold on. Thomas, do you have any? Oh, wait, we're out. Thanks.
Okay.
Start prep.
I stopped prep at 3:06. Duke. Set this up. Okay, email should be sent. Order is T and then case.
Sorry, you said T then case.
Yes.
I bet.
On case, are you gonna start off on presumption or are you gonna start off somewhere else?
Presumption.
Cool.
Sorry, this one was broken. Ooh, I shouldn't have said that. That's a bad word. Sorry to the viewers. If my mom watching this, which I know she's not, but if she is, what's up, Mom?
I think my dad might be watching this, so hi, Dad.
If my dad's watching this, it's not on YouTube, that's for sure. I'm not gonna finish the joke. And I'm sorry this table toad is not working. Give me 2 seconds. Sorry, that took 5 ever. Everybody good and have it up. Lovely, I see some thumbs. What's up, YouTube? Let's dance. Interpretations at a top level from must reduce the United States government alliance commitments was one of the 4 countries by at least substantially limiting the conditions under which the can be activated. They don't mean because they are not an immediate material reduction and activation of a formalized treaty. The rule of the bodies of the team to the bar depending. You must determine whether you're able to surrender a procedure for a decision before you can determine whether or not they've done anything good. They can't say the case always because the ballot doesn't do anything to resolve the impacts. They want to see cross-ex makes the claim that the AF is an attempt to stop nation states from attempting to impose order, but there's no reason to affirm the validity of that idea or their impacts because the ballot doesn't do anything to resolve those. The ballot only assigns a winner, losers, and in prelim speaker points. Therefore, the scope of thought should outweigh the scope of their impacts because there's no reason to vote for high magnitude impacts if your decision does nothing to resolve them. There are 2 internal links to debatability, which would be later on the lobby line. Let's go there. There's not gaslighting, but because you still don't read a plan text and there's a procedural reason to vote negative. Yes, we had some time, but we have things like homework, jobs, and social life. We're not wonky, slush, policy nerds like PR. Now there is no small screw people car argument because we're not saying get the fuck out, brother. We're saying you can read this affirmative with the plan text. They said we meet no, they don't. That was above. If they meet because in the AF wrote there are no alliances post plan, that is affects T. Affects T is bad because it allows them to go to any office based on allows them to go to office, but that's not based on the advocacy statement or the action, but rather based on the post action plan, which is not something that we can necessarily debate. That further undermine their further explicit negative research and undermines negative preparation. They say the impact is not unique. There's no explanation of how they end any of the alliances. You have to gut check. They just say that they expose the fragility of the state, but there is no explanation of how exposing the fragility means that alliance networks go bye-bye, especially given the material interest of states. That'll be later on the case debating. The impact is unique, even if this is our last tournament. Every round matters for the purposes of clash and contestation and debatability. Now, the counter-interpretation debate, and this is where I'll do the impact work, but what do any of these words mean? They said the counter-interpretation is a discussion of the topic and how it implicates ourselves. There's literally no limits. YOLO. Anything would fly. A discussion of the topic could look like, quote, I didn't like this topic paper, or quote, this topic is silly, and now explaining how the topic implicates ourselves could be that could be quote debating alliance networks may help my resume, or it help me make me a good Cato candidate, and it also includes everything the app does. You take the combination of that, apply any advocacy statement and any literature base that is just tangentially related to defense mechanism, because it's important. The advocacy statement doesn't meet the floor; it only meets the ceiling of reducing alliance commitments. It doesn't say anything about reducing defense pacts. All of that exposes negative research burden. Exposes negative research burden, which is bad for limits. One, about a topic provides a predictable stasis point, which guarantees concurrence around the resolution given. Debates competitive nature, absent stasis points, absence will various margins, cutting things that are far from topical for the sake of winning, which doesn't topic research and education. It's also really bad for ground. A predefined controversy is just a vibrant literature base and in-depth class, but it's unreasonable to prepare for us for alternative frameworks. So the ground allocates by the perimeters of the resolution. All 2AC defense was actually concessionary. It's just the KVK database, which their own document, even though they didn't read the card, their document thinks that they think that those capitalism debates are bad. But also, they said the weekend said things like alliances are good, but there's no, they don't actually get rid of the alliances. They just expose the fragility, but there's no explanation of how that gets rid of the alliances. So any other ground would be concessionary ground, which is other critiques which they just permute, and then 2AC and went on in the 2AR and concessionary grounds. It's not enough for the CEDA Octofinals, especially when this is being live streamed. Permutation do both. One, it doesn't solve any of our limits to our ground offense. It may include a reduction in defense pact conditions for defense pact activation, but it still keeps the gate wide open on everything else. That's wrong with their interpretation, and you cannot permute the interpretations because it's about what exists in this round, and only one interpretation can succeed in this round. And they say that we have to prove the impossibility to win the debate. No, we don't. No, we don't, because impossibility is not key to a negative ballot. We win the debate if we win the argument that reading a plan would have been better for Clash, which is better for solving all of their impacts, or if reading a plan allows us to have some stasis point of clash of contestation and allows them to garner all of their offense. And yes, they do make things impossible to debate. That was the limits argument about the securitization argument. One, it's a voting issue. It's a procedural. It's not necessarily an attempt to securitize debate, but rather it is a voting issue, because you should lose if we win that. Not just like you should get out the debate, but rather could embed your offense with the plan text. The securitization of death is not inherent to reading a plan text. These arguments, it's actually not inherent to reading a plan text. You don't have to talk about death when you say that we should end alliance commitments. You can say them for the same reason that the F identifies, which will be later on the TBA. We also don't securitize debate. The TBA and suicide debate are not blackmail. There's no explanation of how this is blackmail. The TBA just proves that you can meet our interrupt with your offense. I'll do that here. Text: the United States federal government shall formally withdraw from all mutual defense treaties. The TBA solves the F if it's true that alliance networks finally attempt to impose order on the world. Ending all mutual defense treaties eliminates one avenue for order imposition. They get advantages based on the harms of imposing order, protecting alliances, etc. And we get this as to eliminate defense pacts, picks out of certain pacts, advantage counterpoints, etc. Any problems with the TBA are further negative ground and provide for a much better debate. They'll say the TBA is a different starting point than the F because they have the USF chief something but one. They don't give a reason why state pat offense is a drink to have solvency or the F performance, and two, negative state action allows a fiating of anti-mutual defense treaties, and it's starting at the nation state butcher whatever the plan Butterfield suits but does butcher really support terrorism good cannot think of chief except by declining to be good in assist monopolize global power and tells backfire to butcher does not prefer what he recommends is for forgiveness of death for addition of evil US could allow themselves to noble sultry and possible letting those who go harmed to unpunished division because morality as its cause of forgiveness does not have to use rather they make claims against them which most of the shall say the most abolished restriction and tell the removal of US military bases and the terrorists have to appeal to you this world US has ignored by refusing to answer by some military by what right to do this overthrow and drop no response is still a response to the attack a 60 and putting us and US shield opening is most reasonable is most reasonable that such violent provocation starts to serve no one and need not be acquainted with theoretical terms and effective violence such as naive this utopian moment that the US must might forgive is unrealistic, but every chance opens up a new space that also never be understood the rule, but as a form he has not talking about real death where the theories of such a value are certainly lost. The skills are not based on eradicating uncertainty. There are good skills from clash, and that clash is key to generate ideas of best of things like racism, speciesism, which he said clash is a prior ethical concern. This also answers the last anarchist news argument because clash is key to ethical decision making and ethical apps. We have to be able to test our ideas against well formed solvency presses to identify what the best way forward is. But the skills based on debating whether or not you could read this with a plan text or whether or not you should read a plan text, it's not the same thing as other species to different side of racial eradication. There are obviously levels to this, but we are not authorization. Death being necessary to VTL does not really implicate topicality. The Birch evidence is correct. The Birch evidence is correct. I'll do that here. KJ, you have to take case. Okay, it's all written down. We straight turn the wheels of transparency out, send the long bird card, line explanation debate is a game, and see as a rule. Rules are fundamentally voluntary because they can only be enforced through both sides agreeing to them, but the rule does say that we should debate about policy, but does not make us agree with that. Debating the state in a debate doesn't change our beliefs anymore than playing Monopoly affirms the value of predatory lending. The opposite is true as well, which is to solvency. Take out playing outside the rules of Monopoly doesn't break down capitalism, even if they make the quality of debate worse by playing outside the rules. That just makes the black players not revolutionaries. That means that they're in a double bind, either one, but on perception because being untopical in any given debate won't slow up to change the way people play, which proves they're no better of an idea than the status quo voting neck, or it means that they assign value to nothing for them for some external purpose. Voting app says that there's broader value to winning the game in a different way than the other side was prepared to play, which makes you bad. That means of fulfilling a desire for transgression by saying voting for them can transgress better, even if they think that voting app means that you get rid of all attempts of nation states to enforce order. This means that every time that we say that quote, we don't have to solve all attempts to oppose order, or we just have to prove the app is a good idea. It proves our turn. Voting app says it feels good to station rule breaking because it's unknowable and symbolic terrorism. It gains satisfaction from confusing debate, even if it doesn't solve the impacts they've outlined, which ultimately leaves us content with being dissonant debaters in short circuits. Further action err towards our psychoanalytical explanation. Think about it. There's no coherent reason to vote app besides it's not a normal debate. Now, that kind of explains the argument. Yeah, there may not be a huge external impact, but that's our point. The game a debate is purely useless at actually solving any impact. So if you vote app because you don't think it's a bad idea, because you think it's a bad idea, even if it doesn't do much, we trust our own power psychoanalytic investment in the ballot, and it actually makes whatever you think they do is less likely to succeed. It's not necessarily fun. Sorry, that was a bundling process. We're not going to go for the fun stuff, but it's more of a psychoanalytic theory. There's not a resentment about this because there's models do not exist. The impacts are not necessarily inevitable because you're only concerned about impacts in this round, which did have to be inevitable because you could have read a plain text. I've already answered anarchist news at the level of content, but I'll answer at the level of form. Disregard it. It was terrible scholarship. Anarchist news 10. I didn't want to publish it since I don't believe it. It's great, but a friend asked if I could do it so it could be exciting in a debate tournament. That's all fine and dandy. The case, the only thing I'll say is that there's no explanation of how the AF is saying death to America and how exposing the fragility of the state causes acceleration to a point where the simulation collapses. You've read the 1AC, that's fine and dandy, but that does not get rid of consumer interest or the material stuff that states think is important. That's time. And just do the case stuff that's in the doc. We'll count that as prep, so I'll say 304 left. I'm ready to chat whenever you all are.
Okay. You said you're good?
Yeah, I'm sorry. Is my mic better now? Does it sound a little better?
Yeah, my volume was low too, so it might not have been you.
No worries, no worries. Let me just put my mask on real quick.
Okay.
All right, I'm good.
Sounds good. Okay. How does the TVA result in the redemption of evil?
How does it result in the redemption of evil?
Mm-hmm.
That the purpose of the TVA is not to say that the state is redeemable or that evil can be redeemed, but rather
Butterfield evidence says that Baudrillard recommends.
Well, Baudrillard says that like if there are military bases in the Middle East, we shouldn't have those, and those are not good things. So advocating for an end of all mutual defense pacts means that they never get triggered. Those are the basis of alliances.
Where does your evidence say
no longer happen?
Where does your evidence say that?
Hold on. So the purpose of the card is to say that Baudrillard would support the TVA, but we've explained how the
card
TVA
just says like Baudrillard thinks like military bases are bad, and
yes,
that we should advocate.
The crux of the U.S. alliance system, even though you all didn't want to read a card on this, is mutual defense treaties. If there are no mutual defense treaties, alliance networks don't make sense because they're not just free trade agreements. They're for the purpose of securing states, the purpose of securitizing states and protecting like sovereignty, which you identify. Those things are bad. We get rid of mutual defense treaties. No more alliance networks.
Let's talk about topicality being a rule. If it's a rule, why are we still having a debate about it?
Because we've said that it's a rule that you opt in to adhering to.
Rule. So it's an optional rule?
Like, yeah, we say that the rules may be cooked up by some people, but we still say that they're good for certain reasons. I don't know what you said. I'm sorry.
I mean, y'all are like, it's about rules and we need to play inside the rules, and the fact that we didn't means we're transgressive and can't solve cap.
No. Well, playing inside the rules is more transgressive because it's like LMAO. These things are arbitrary, but I'm gonna do it anyway because fuck it, we ball. Yo.
Yeah. So how is the AF like outside the rules?
You didn't read a plain text.
How is T a rule? How is T the same? How is T the same thing as like speech times or like decision times or
speech and decision times are also arbitrary. Notice how decision time here is like 2.5 hours, whereas at the NDT it's like 2 hours and 15 minutes. right, we think these things are arbitrary, but we think that playing within them is transgressive. We've identified T specifically as something that's playing within it. And sorry, speech times and decision times may be arbitrarily set.
We have reasons why we think the F is topical. Why is that not a reason why we've also followed the rule of topicality?
Because
like
you didn't say
you have reasons why your vision of topicality might be better than ours.
You dead ass just said death to America. What does that have to do with the federal government?
I think it has everything to do with the federal government.
I ain't finished the explanation.
All right.
You said death to America. That is not the same thing as having the federal government limit conditions for defense pact activation. You said 3 words.
I just said that we see this shit differently. That's all I'm saying.
Yeah, like I'm glad maybe we can both up our prescription on our glasses or our contacts. Like it's not topical under our interpretation. And
but I think it's topical under ours.
Yeah, and we say your interpretation was boo boo. So
I just don't know how that solves your game playing stuff. But all right.
Okay. It's just going to be case and then the poetry K.
Yeah, where in case are you starting?
Just at the top. I'll send it out. Huh?
Presumption.
Like it's the presumption stuff. It's the first thing. Let me just save this and send it out. Okay. Sorry about that. I'm sending it out now. I'm gonna give it a couple seconds, and then if people could just tell me if they're not ready. I don't have my screen up, so.
I haven't gotten this talk yet, but I'll let you know.
Okay, I did send it. I'm just waiting.
Okay, I'm good to go now. When everyone else is.
Okay, so anyone not ready? Okay. Cool. Can't may vote negative or subject. They claim the voting app eliminates nation state attempt to impose order, but it provides no explanation for how voting apps fills up or sufficient to interrogation to trigger attempts to impose order. This offensive sends recourse in the law. Their method lacks direct connection to broader political circles that alters material conditions directly challenges the powerful groups and structures that enable globalization seek to impose order. At best, it means voting app is symbolic assertion of a position that doesn't say anything about society that we didn't know already. And at worst, the 1AC becomes a how-to presentation that lets nation state alliance networks crack down accordingly. The Beaujard death cakes and the bros here are evidence that the idea that we need to understand death is reversible or bubbling up underside and proliferate signifiers of death to check because it will to make everything live. That idea as a telos keeping and accelerating death representations gets co-opted by the alt-right and dovetailed into what the alt-right believes into stuff like death cults perpetuated through Nazi culture. They aren't affirming radical anti-Western terrorism. They're affirming alt-right accelerationists to believe that modernity needs to crumble. We need to accelerate the circulation of deathly signifiers. That way it works in reality by deregulation, neoliberalism, more markets, and more destruction. You're not a symbolic terrorist. That answer is incorrect, but you're an undergraduate at Bing on Zoom who reads a poem written and translated by someone else. The nation states, good offense, and the Lumberg evidence limiting nation states cause deliberate intervention, global civil war, which justifies an invasion. Nations who do want sovereign borders, nations like South Sudan and Serbia who want their own sovereignty and borders are totally cast aside in favor of the affirmative. The idea to deconstruct those aggressively justifies intervention, makes the borders that they create seem bad. Realism and mad are good because they mean we recognize the form of relation to death, because mad is not an attempt to prolong life, but an attempt to recognize death around us, which affords ethical relationships. No productivity. Decide you vote negative because they didn't do anything for anyone. It's not about being productive. It's about meeting the affirmative burden. The K. They double turn themselves to value poetry, comes from refusing any interpretation, even one that says poetry can't be interpreted. That's the Kennedy evidence, the internal contemplation and ontological disruption that poetry provokes, creates a mutually exclusive demand, or politics, or any action at all. This means that the AF ballot structurally devalues their poetry because they didn't read it and just sit down. They irrevocably tainted it with analysis that you'll never really factor in, like in cross-ex when they explained the purpose of reading poetry was for us to not understand it. They completely made that transparent, which means they linked to any of their transparency offense. Any reason to vote on the poem was good is unique to add to them, which you can vote on without even considering the rest of the one I see deficiency. Framing defense is enough of a net benefit. Our evidence says combining poetry and politics neutralize the potential. Both the poetry won't change our subjectivity, and Kennedy says including poetry precludes a clear-headed and rational appraisal of real conditions of social life, which is a prerequisite for any meaningful attempt to bring about political change. They have proved the combination is necessary, which by not making an argument for why the content of the app external to the poem is necessary, they do not access, and there's no solvency deficit to the pic, so they don't get it anyways. Form outweighs context. The only response to the defacement of poetic values to articulate a vow of science. You can agree with the value of everything they've said and still vote neg to pull the rug out for under ourselves and affirm the inability to meet the burden of proving their analysis was sufficient to activate the poetry's value. I won't read the card on that. The first permutation, they can't permit one person apply. I'll explain the also mutual exclusivity is clear. It's not a concrete advocacy any more than the app. It's a test of intrinsicness of the poem, and the rest of the one I see voting negative simply refuses the authority to judge the poem, so it's competitive at the level of the ballot. Even if they win the poem is good, they have to win that it should be both analyzed and judged. The permutation suffers their choice to include the poem in debate, which means it's not the whole one AC. Reject the team. It's impossible to debate them if they can't change. They defend the post facto, and any perm is a reason to vote negative. Absent our plan, the burden is to prove that the one AC could have improved, so the perm doesn't disprove competition, it just proves all solvency. There's two disads to an AF ballot which impact turn any net benefit to the perm. The first is a false risk disad. Any reason the AF of the perm is net beneficial, you infuse an AF ballot with false sense of risk to give their poetry a veneer of political measure while stripping it of critical purchase, which was the evidence from the 1 and C, and 2, the judgment disad there. Any decision you render is stop it to the process of interrogation that makes poetry provokes. You should refute the positioning of yourself as authority in favor of process of debate. Lerman in 15. It is natural to think we have reached the end of the interrogation. We should not stop. We will not have reached the end. Interrogation must be incessant. It also natural for an authority figure to be besought interrogation. Any authorities avert interrogation. Any authority reduce offers a petition of intoxicating principle, making continuing interrogation either impossible or unlikely. Stoppage must be momentary. The rest too long to succumb to intoxicating principle will block the desire to continue interrogation. It's to leave the realm of experience where there is no authority on other than interrogation without limit. Experience is refraining from turning authorities into which might stop interrogation or make us feel as though interrogation no longer needed. Mark the card and needed. The argument about poem being key. They say both are key, but their self-aware analysis that push communication to its limits, but they're not because their intent. This may be intent, but we have an explanation of how it gets judged. If they want the communication is getting the analysis poetic, it means they didn't need the poem, so preventing the analysis solves the fact that they read a poem, make sure it's confusing, harder to dwell on aesthetic difference and whatever they thought was in the poem. I'll do the condo picks bad argument here. No, it isn't. The argument that it's abusive, no, it isn't. It's a test of your method. If you think it is, our often still it weighs, and you can judge kick the pick for. And dispo doesn't solve any of this evidence, any of this argument, because one, there's no predictable interpretation of what dispositionality means, which is it means it's worse for negative engagement. B, it deters reading any counter advocacy because even the weakest offense is able to beat it. C, as offense is about condo is not unique to picks, so it's not predictable, and you can read the offense, which deters us for going for it, which means 2 in our choice checks. The condo picks argument, you can read the and just leveraging the F and making smart problem solve the argument responsibility stuff. Condo picks encourage testing the F from multiple angles. They've recommended to research the F from multiple angles because we know we can only read one and can't make choices. Better engagement F argument responsibility. The cannibalism stuff doesn't matter because we want offense to improving the app, and there's no impact to it because none of their labor was actually produced by them. The second argument for the permutation, there's no benefit to it because our evidence says poetry alone is sufficient. There's no warrant as to why reading random academics and book reviews of Baudrillard is uniquely poetic or radical, and the entire point of our evidence picking and choosing is a good thing, which answers the perm do the pick and transparency links to them, which was below. The perm is theoretically illegit on the perm do the pick because we've proven mutual exclusivity above. If you give this, it just proves that there's no ground access on framework because they'll use theoretically illegitimate perms to get out of any critique of our methodology. That everything is poetry argument they'll make. The majority of the one I see is coherent. It explains their offense. Cross-ex, this even proves it. The distinction between poetry and political and academic language needs to be made as per our own evidence because it's there's no because we asked what's the purpose of the poem, and their answers contextualize it to Baudrillard, which increases transparency and destroys the sanctity of art, which all of their authors would advocate for. And we can defend separate rhetorical parts of the one I see negate only parts. They can't sever any part because it's best for reciprocity and it's the only internally coherent interpretation of debate. All their arguments against this aren't offense anyways. They're just defensive permutation, which means you should still evaluate the pick on its own, especially for negative argument engagement. If we're right, the poetry and politics shouldn't be combined.
Okay, we have 5:40 and starting it right now. Okay, 155.
I believe there's a doc. Yeah, no doc. Okay, switch audio.
Sorry, did you say no document?
No doc. One sec, y'all are muted for me, so if anybody's talking. Okay, let me stand up and like go to the stand, and then I'll give the order. Oops. Oh, exciting. I knocked over a box. Okay, so it's going to be case case and then poetry and then tea. Okay. Short overview on case definitely should fit on the same page as wherever you're flowing that. I don't know what the vibes are for this round. Yeah. Case, poetry, tea. I'm just gonna grab a sip of water and then we're good to go. Once I figure out where to put it. Alrighty, is anybody not ready? Cool. All right, final call. Thumbs up from everyone. Cool. Debate is a machine of capitalist indoctrination that robs students of their alterity to reduce them to a state of total functionality. Their research methodology is complicit in the will to transparency to achieve a fixity of meaning and knowledge and premised on the securitization against the other, which results in inevitable death. Their impact is exploitation that manifests itself in global extermination, the desire for one-to-one correspondence between sign and referent itself, defeating and causes the purging of all singularities and threatening others seen as savage or irrational. We need a fatal theory that can render nation states enigmatic, hyper-conforming to the form of communication to accelerate it towards its own vacuity. It's try or die for us to reintroduce a sense of alterity to students through our cry, death to America, rendering the world unintelligible. We are like the graffiti that was appropriated for radical politics in May 68 in the show Black Mirror, which mimicked the form of television to reveal its unreality. There are 3 line-by-line arguments. First, they went for this presumption argument. The one point is the productivity DA. This also turns their arguments on T. Solvency wasn't a rule or a necessary condition. They have not defined what our burdens are, but instead they've outlined that we need to meet some imagined standards so that we can be productive enough. This goalpost will always get higher and higher because they want nothing from us but our labor, which leads to burnout and decks any education off. And second is that we solve by refusing to solve. We are truer than true, fairer than fair. We make enigmatic what is clear. Next is we produce a symbolic terrorist singularity, which gives the West a gift that it cannot return, i.e. the West can only respond to the cry of death to America with intervention, but that is not a humiliation, but rather an act of war, which is an incompatibility in terms of the form. They say that nations want borders, but the only reason that we value borders, the only reason that these nations need borders is because we value the image of the nation state in the first place, which means that we access the root cause and secondarily the reason that it's dangerous not to have borders and the reason that these violences are able to happen is because of the death securitization stuff, which I'll get to on T. They say Nazi death cults say death good, but they say death good because we should kill minorities. We say that valuing death as an intrinsic evil causes the otherization of minorities that leads to Nazi death cults in the first place. Shocked I got to make a Nazi death cults argument. Poetry. They made a fundamental mistake. The entire app is poetic. They impose the will to transparency by attempting to draw those lines to decide where the poetry stops and where the content ends. We are a pure form, which means that they don't have any ability to isolate a distinction between the ath and the K without linking to our will to transparency today, which I'll do here. Their attempts to delineate poetry from content are attempts to purge mystery and otherness through the imposition of meaning that results in global warfare. Rumsfeld quest to eliminate the unknowns in the Iraq war and the school to prison pipeline in the debate. This caused the PRL because of an intolerance of alternative modes of advocacy and inclusion of debaters of color, which you can cross-apply to T. They destroy value to life, evacuate joy from life, and debate the expunging of unpredictability to render everything pre-planned results in the hell of the same where events aren't allowed to happen in the topic can't unfold on its own. They need to win that imposing transparent hermeneutics on education is worth constant implosive violence, turning form. We are turning form via the will to transparency, which means that they can't solve the F and links to all of our offense. Also, we're not going for the condo argument, but we are going for the dropped piece of offense that their understanding of the pick is something that they can kick out of as a form of white fluidity, which pathologizes people of color when white folks make promises and don't keep them, i.e. their ability to kick out of something that they have said creates poetic solvency, is gross and problematic. They don't have any reason why we're exclusive with policy action. The evidence they read actually goes at, yes, commentary is useless, but it's their commentary that seeks to tell us when poetry stops. It's a no-go on this sheet. The aff is pure form. I'm gonna do the permutation really quick. If the neg refuses to judge the perm, the aff refuses the authority to the judge to judge anything at all, which means it's try or die for the permutation, which you can think of as a scrambling of their explanation of content. And yeah. Frame this flow with the gaslighting DA decks, their abuse story. They won the flip and chose the neg. We sent the full text to AF, and it's been on the wiki since the NDT. You had 2 full days and access to the entire Michigan squad to write answers and generate strats. They made an active choice to read framework, proves that they don't care about class fairness or education, only gaining whatever possible competitive edge they can. Next, there's terminal defense on this flow. Their interpretation doesn't allow for any topical AF. The condition of immediate and material, not hypothetical and imaginary, is impossible to meet. It links to the entire 1AC offense. Their policy making and fairness, good offense can't be solved by their interpretation. Next is the we meet, we reduce alliances by re-injecting mystery words don't have meaning, so you can't win. That we're outside the resolution, and if you do, you link to the debt securitization DA. But also we reduce the alliance between life and subjecthood using the destroying the defense pact that is oriented through the securitization against death. Next is the counter interpretation we're going for. Your interpretation plus our app, it's a perm that solves their all of their impact. There's no impact to arbitrariness. If our interpretation isn't reasonable and it's been successful in injecting mystery, we're impact turning limits with the with the debt securitization stuff. Which I'll do here. The attempt to impose form onto the app is never neutral. It requires an image of the good proper debater, the correct one who sees that obeys those rules. This process of making meaning requires securitization against a radical other figures, a position of death and evil. This is how violence operates. Attempts to access and understand reality, justify and legitimate infinite genocide and imperialist projects produce conformity to the subject. This turns and outweighs their impacts. Their model of fairness requires that some people do not have access. This also answers the TVA. The TVA is not just about content, but the form of imposing. The USFG is never neutral. It's not that we have to say state good or state bad, but the act of making us do something a certain way means that their app will never, their TVA will never solve any of the app. University DA. The anarchist news evidence operates within the university to make it more productive through their framework argument, sustains the space as a site for concentration of privilege, dependent on the evisceration of the outside and social death. Like how our laptops were made possible by resource extraction in Africa, we need to forefront complicity to enact a semiotic interaction, which is our app. I'm gonna do the street turn now. This street turn just proves that they have no idea what they're talking about. I'll start with the A impact. Yes, we don't spill up. That's because we're a singularity. The idea that you need to globalize is why they link to any of these things in the first place, and is also terminal defense against them, because unlike us, they require the ability to derive some kind of material solvency from the ballot, which actually is our answer to the second point, that we assign value to voting for them, but in reality, we assign no value to anything, which is why you vote for us.
304. Go ahead and start it. Let's groove tonight. Shut the spot. Doo-doo. Case. Doo-doo. Poetry pick. T. Doo-doo. Where's my time? Oh, my timer's on my computer. Here. I think I already said the order. I'll say it again. Case, poetry pick, thoughtacality. Shout out to the youngins watching this. Any questions? Is everybody cash? Money? Okay, for sure. Where's these puppies at? Right. Cool. I'll start. There are a couple of ways to vote negative. The first is the presumption ballot, and the second is topicality. Now, there are two ways to vote affirmative on the case page. One, either the app accelerates the forces of simulation so much that they bring about a demise, or second, the performance of the 1EC was good outside of solvency. There's an issue with the first affirmative ballot. Acceleration is just some it's just some alt-right shit. The Brazier evidence indicates that the idea that we have to accelerate everything just gets co-opted there, not affirming radical anti-Western terrorism. They are affirming alt-right accelerationists who also believe that modernity needs to crumble. We need to accelerate the circulation of deathly signifiers. But the way that works is not just Nazi death goals, but it's also deregulation, neoliberalism, more arguments, and more destruction. If states are premised on the impetus of making people live as long as possible, to avoid that gets rid of things like healthcare benefits, etc., which corporations would obviously stand. They're not symbolic terrorists. They simply read a poem that was translated and written by someone else. They're just two people on Zoom University who are sitting on what looks like to be the casting couch. Now, they do link these or prefer our warrants, and their answers do not apply. The Nazi death cults argument is it's not a trivializing the Holocaust or trivializing Nazism, but the death cults actually glorified Nazi death, and they view white death as something that is honorable. It is the romanticization of death that is for me, which is obviously problematic, which is the reason why the first affirmative ballot is not viable. The second one is that they did something good outside of solvency by just reading the performances. There's no reason why the ballot is key to any of that. The Rigakos in law evidence is offense. Their method lacks a direct connection to broader political structures that alters material conditions or directly challenges the powerful groups and structures that enable globalization and seek to impose order. At best, that means that voting F is a symbolic assertion of resistance that doesn't say anything about society that we didn't already know. And at worst, we want to see becomes a how-to presentation that lets nation states, alliances, networks, and international organizations learn our tactics and crack down accordingly. Is a reason how you should feel comfortable voting for it. It's also offense. The Longbear evidence indicates that it justifies violent interventions, which they've conceded. It turns the enemy. It turns the enemy of the good into the enemy of the bad. Eliminating nation states causes liberal intervention because other states would say that, oh, Syria, South Sudan, and Serbia, you want borders, you want sovereignty. Those things are bad. We are going to intervene to make sure you get rid of those things. If the ideas that realism and mutual destruction are good because they mean that we recognize a form of relationship death, and because MAD is not an attempt to prolong life, but rather an attempt to recognize that death is all around us and form ethical relationships too. The only other argument is the productivity test set, but the burden of the affirmative is to prove that the app is doing the app is a good idea. There's no spill up, so they don't meet that burden, and there's no reason why the ballot is key to proving that the reading of the 1EC was a good idea. They also already read it, so you should feel comfortable voting negative. The poetry pick, we're not going to go for it because the permutation is a test of competition. The cross-apply everything about the cross applications about diluting poetry only assumes a world in where topicality means that you can't read poetry with a plain text, but you can. They're not mutually exclusive. It's not whiteness because I can kick out whatever the fuck I want. I'm also not a white person, and literally everybody of any race can break promises. They also was not a promise because we said it was conditional. So our promise was that we can kick out of it if we want to. Also, permutation to check. We're conceding it. It's just a test of competition. The T debate. I'll do the impact work debate at the top. They dropped the 2 and C argument that clash and debatability are key to all of their impacts. Yes, the topical of the T does not have a lot of offense on the negative side because nothing spills up or spills out of this round. It's only about what happens in this round. But clash is key to whatever they say debate is good for. If they think that clash, if they think debate or reading the app is key to further accelerate the simulation to stop nation states from imposing order or get rid of nation states, clash is key to that because we have to be able to test our ideas against well-formed solvency presses in order to figure out whether or not that is the best way to engage in accelerationism or the best way to stop nation states extremists who are trying to impose order. Clash is also key to a lot of their offenses if they go for things like subject formation or about forefronting complicity. Clash is key to test is key to identify the best ways to forefront complicity or the best ways to get rid of productivity or privilege within the debate round. They get rid of that by getting rid of a stasis point via the affirmative by not reading a plan text and via their counter interpretation by exploiting limits. It allows anything can be considered a discussion of the topic. Like I didn't like the topic, or this is silly, and anything can be an implication of how the topic affects ourselves. Like debating this is going to be good for my resume, or makes me good for CEDA, or makes me some woke person from Binghamton. All of these things explode limits, which is bad for debatability and Clash, which is already impact turn all of their arguments. There's no gaslighting to say yes, they foresee the arguments that we still have things like homework and real jobs to tend to in social times. We're not wonky slosh policy nerds like PR. There's not a small school or POC dissent that didn't extend it, and we're not saying get out. We're saying that you can read this with a plan text. The T is a procedural argument, and we think it's also a good argument. But we've also engaged in KSTS. There are topical versions of the app that was explained in the 2 and T, and all of the offense was conceded because they have not given a reasons why the state good offense or any of that is why any of the state good or any of the state bad offense is intrinsic to app solvency or app form. They would still be able to read a poem. They would still be able to read a poem. We're not forcing you to do anything, but rather we're saying that saying the USFG should do X would be a lot better for app solvency and provides Clash, which is exponentially better for affirmative solvency. But we're not imposing USFG on you, so that doesn't make a lot of sense. They didn't answer the reasons why the TVA would be good, and we read a card on it, so it's a reason why you should feel comfortable voting on it. They don't get rid of alliances because they don't meet our interpretation, which was the federal government reduces alliance commitments with one of the 4 countries by at least substantially limiting the conditions under which its defense pact can be activated. There's no definition of what injecting mystery actually means, or how that pushes us towards acceleration. They can see the answer to the permutation. You can't do that. One, it doesn't solve any of our limits or our ground offense because you may reduce defense pact activation, but that still keeps the floodgates open on all the reasons why their interpretation is bad, and the term can't exist in this round because only one interpretation can emerge. The university just was new and the 1 AR, but they don't create more productive subjects, and we don't prioritize privilege because you can still gain all of their offensive reading of plan text. There's no argument that reading a plan text means that you become more privileged or more productive. Even if I was not able to vote, I am still able to read a plan text, which proves that's not necessarily privileged. We're not gonna go for the Berg stuff. They didn't straight turn it though because they put value in the non-value, which is clearly bad.
Okay, we have 155 starting now.
Is that time?
Okay. So it's the case then T. Is anyone not good? Thumbs up from people. Yep. All right. Let's do this.
They didn't kick out of the pig properly. The one-air didn't extend an argument about why they steal an app. Rather, our critique of conditional ethics. They've conceded that their performance of kicking out of the pig in the 2NR, which was supposed to make our poetry more valuable as per the 1AR, is the same logic of white fluidity politicians who take the work of minorities and call it their own and use it against them and then go back on their promises. It's not about your identity or about your specific privilege, but about the form of conditionality as it is in debate. This is an epistemology DA to their entire model debate because it proves that the educational value of debate that they speak to is not the creation of precise activism or policy analysis, but rather a form of life-denying nihilism that overemphasizes competition to the point where we become contrived nihilists who believe in fucking nothing other than exploiting tragedy for our own academic gain because our promises are not even promises and we don't need to make any use. Instead vote affirmative because we've impact turned the form of debate, which means that prior to winning any of their impacts, they must win that debate itself as an activity worth preserving. Arguments about class, education, and fairness all presuppose that our activity creates ethical political subjects whose presence within the activity creates positive contributions to the world around us. Their imposition of an interpretation of debate sutures political violence by delineating acceptable forms of life. Now, they cannot win this debate because they have no competing theory for how the world functions in the 2NR that isn't subsumed by our theory. Power operates through the neutralization of resistance and the consumption of science. Liberation is impossible. Resistance is futile. External critiques of the system find themselves caught in the same web of power that they seek to destroy. If we win this argument, it means that we have an epistemology DA that internally turns every single argument they made on TV. A couple of important case arguments. First is our neutralization arguments. If there are 5 steps to institution building, the neg is just explain to you 1, 2, and 5 and assume 3 and 4 will work out, which oversimplifies the complexity of modern power. We don't have to win any other argument. Their form of topicality is a punitive form that unconditionally demands action that plays in the form of the system via the TVA and switch side debate arguments. This is a nice thought in the abstract, but debate destroys the potential for political change. Think about the trade-off that debate forces with political action. We cut cards when we could be protesting. We demand discussions about the problematic nature of debate when we could be discussing the political action to shape the world. Their interpretation cannot solve any of their burden arguments about having school and a job. This isn't a neutral starting point. Their interpretation still requires endless research against policy. Knowing the fastest internal link to extinction doesn't give us skills to change oppressive regimes, and learning about the tactics of the oppressor doesn't mean it stops oppressing. What we need is a semiotic insurrection, a critique on the terms of the system which calls into question the disconnect that overdetermines the form and content of discussions that we have and changes the question from how should we frame our work to how does debate make our work for it. Now, the second important thing here is reactivity. We'll concede that nothing spills up from this debate, which means that they don't have uniqueness for any of the impact turns they went to for the AF, and they're not contextual to the way our affirmative reveals the form of debate as an illusion. Now, the AF solves the cry death to America, forces the system to recognize its complicity and violence and throws a wrench in the general functions of consumerism. Only our affirmative calls its inherent contradiction into question, which is a sufficient reason to vote AF. We don't have to win a massive solvency argument or win that we destroy debate because it doesn't matter. The ballot forces the negative to recognize their own complicity within the halls of this corrupted university. Our bishop evidence indicates that this act is sufficient to force the system to recognize its own contradictions and turn in on itself. That's a sufficient reason to vote AF. Allowing debaters to continue to believe in the revolutionary potential of this space is not only dangerous, but actively turns the ability to create political change, which means that even if they win that political change is possible, their model of debate ensures that it will always be ineffective. We are Nazi death cults there. We are a form of self-effacement that acts as a form of radical illusion. That was the 2AC in 1AR overview. We don't see death as something that is romantic or something to strive for, but rather as something that's imminent rather than transcendent, something that is always already there in the topic. Now, survival is also different from life. Our bishop evidence draws the distinction. It says that life needs death, as other cannot have a positive value without the apart. Survival is the constant state of existence, which is the hyper-functional attempt to run from death. Yeah. And so the presumption stuff above, we've internally turned their Nazi death cult arguments. The death securitization arguments will further prove that topicality proper. You should frame this entire debate through the anarchist news evidence. It was not you in the 1AR. It is our university DA. Our argument is that the academy is a necropolis premised on the concentration of privilege and mass exploitation. Education is sustained by the production of social death, like the resources mining necessary to make our laptops and the overworked service staff necessary to make our tournament possible. Again, it's not about an individual specific privilege, but about the concentration of privilege in the academy itself. The link argument is not that plans are is not about reading a plan, but rather the very attempt to re-inject authentic meaning and justice into the university. The idea that if we read a topical version, the affirmative would be more fair to debate and would produce more clash. That is educational. Our argument is that this maintains the complicity in everyday violence because liberal curriculums always point at problems outside of themselves to pretend that they can solve them, like the idea that the United States can simulatedly remove itself from all alliance commitments. That maintains the facade of the ethicality of the university, whitewashes the history of exploitation necessary to make the material convergence of this space possible. Our argument is that instead you should vote affirmative to forefront our complicity to tear apart the university's facade of benevolence, to expose its underlying militarization, refuse the injection of meaning into the academy in favor of destroying debate's innocence. No system is abolished through liberation, but rather through the introduction of death into mystery, which opens up new world. Value to life outweighs all of their offense. Survival is not worth it if we are existing in a system that's worse than death. Now, you can extend our counter interpretation. They've been conceded there's no impact to arbitrariness. If they win their internal links, if they win their internal link arguments, it just proves that our affirmative has been successful at introducing mystery into their model of debate, which they concede is key to value life, outweighs all of their arguments. They don't have a terminal impact in the 2 They were really good at explaining all of their internal links, but I just don't know what impact you can compare to some of our very good impact turns that the 2 is light on. Now, finally, the securitizing death DA, even if they're right about the normative best practices in debate, our argument is a critique about making their argument into a voting issue. Our argument is that debate cannot be separated from the global systems of control and surveillance and preemption of deathly unpredictable events that we call the integral reality. They've conceded the 1A example about how their model of debate, even if their intention is useful, has been politically mobilized by the debate community to create things like the PRL. Our argument is that this means that their topical version and switch-sided arguments are nothing but blackmail that allows the semiotic conformity of this community to maintain itself via a structural exclusion paradigm that creates racism, sexism, ableism that affects and outweighs procedural fairness because it affects people beyond the round, even after you render a technical decision. None of their evidence is in the context of debate or how debate is able to produce the skills or clash or knowledge that they speak of. Good debate.
Yeah, great debate, folks.
Hello, this is a friendly reminder. You have about 13 minutes left for decision time. 13 minutes. Thank you. Just a friendly reminder that there's 5 minutes left till decision time. 5 minutes. Thank you so much.
I think the decision should be in. So I don't have it.
For me, it says decision complete, but it does not show.
The president, Brian Rubai, will be here to announce the decision.
Okay.
As is customary at CEDA Nationals from the Octos on. So,
is there any way I can access my comments? Because that's where I typed my ballot.
You fool! You didn't save it in a Word doc.
Ask Catherine. that is above my pay grade.
Okay, I can go to edit feedback and see it. All right.
Well.
And the suspense begins.
Hopefully not too long. I apologize to keep people waiting. Thank you so much. I see one judge. I just want to make sure we've got all the judges here.
Yeah, I'm here.
Perfect. Thank you very much, Jeffrey. Much appreciated.
Yeah, Nick and I are both here.
Yeah, no, we have all the judges.
Oh, perfect. Okay, wonderful. So sorry. Y'all, congratulations on a wonderful debate. And thank you again for letting us stream a very good Sweet 16 debate and the last one to come in a very close 2-1 decision. The winner is the University of Michigan. Congratulations, y'all.
Okay, so great debate, y'all. I sat. I thought that this debate had a lot of interesting clash, but it's also very messy, as I think there are some tensions between issues regarding spill up and sort of the role of this debate and impact filters that, you know, I think both teams have a lot of slippage on. To get some stuff out of the way, I start with this white condo argument. I don't want to vote on it. I think the 1AR didn't invest enough ink on it. I think the 2AR is pretty new, but the one argument that is extended from the 1AR is that they didn't break a promise because they said it was condo. I don't know why this promise framing is the one you're going for, especially in a world where they say it's condo. You know, it's not really super relevant for my decision. So the closest that I come to voting neg is on the case page. So I'll begin with T. I think Bronek makes a correct decision isolating the university dissed on top of the T flow. It's not new in the 1AR. It's an extension of the anarchist news card. It was very clearly, you know, extended throughout. I don't think the 2NC answers were great. Even though this evidence is like written for debate, you do have to, you know, engage in the warrants. In the 2AR, there are two new arguments. A, that y'all aren't privileged, and B, that the app has to prove why reading a plan is sort of uniquely bad. I don't think these are responsive to the broader structural argument that debate as a whole is built on sort of exploitation and forced labor, resource mining, etc., which means it's a broader question of the unethicality of debate as an activity, which is, you know, also sort of claims being made on the case page and the critical condo stuff. About how these sort of clash arguments presume this is an activity worth preserving. The 1AR, 2AR argues that forefronting complicity and forcing the university to avert its gaze from the outside to look in on itself tears down the facade of ethicality, disrupts the presumed innocence of the activity, etc. It's difficult, you know, this makes it difficult for me to sort of evaluate these clash arguments. Especially given that the 2AR on case is extending claims about how, like, even if the app does not spill up or solve anything beyond the confines of this individual round, giving them the ballot still sort of forces the neg to confront complicity. I don't think there's much engagement from either side on these clash or debt securitization disads. There's sort of two ships passing the night. I line up the, you know, 2NC 1AR arguments and then the final rebuttals on them. And it's really just the same. Let's see, the 2NR, I think both teams sort of are admitting that their impacts are very small and that these are margins. It's at the top of 2AR and 2NR. The framework stuff about debate iteratively improving the app's ability to intervene in alliance structures, I don't think that this is necessarily responsive to these broader claims about like why is it worth preserving debate. And I think that some of these case arguments about the affirmative's theory of power also insulate clash, i.e. the neutralization arguments about the impossibility of engaging with institutions in a manner other than implosion. The last thing sort of for me on T is that for some very strange reason, the neg is not defending a broader claim about models of debate, which makes this, I don't know why you do this. I think this makes T like way harder than it should be. And it means that sort of this incredibly obnoxious, silly counterinterpretation, which I would never really take seriously, is an argument that I end up taking seriously because, you know, we're not considering models of debate and sort of perverse incentives that this might have for other teams. You extend the argument that this would open the floodgate to other apps. I do not know how this interacts with broader arguments that I can't consider models or spill up. You know, I don't think this is sort of game winning, but in light of the broader university arguments, this, you know, mitigates this stuff to an extent. So onto case, I think the 2NR's case analysis is very compelling. It is, I come very close to voting negative because I think while, you know, the AF has some pieces of defense, I think the neg is, you know, winning a decent risk of some of these turns. However, the neg is not really engaging at all with the AF's theory of power. You know, especially as the sort of final rebuttals wind down. And there are still these broader questions in my mind about spill up and, you know, how I should evaluate and compare impacts. So to get some irrelevant stuff out of the way, I think the AF wins that they're not like a Nazi death cult because they don't romanticize death as this sort of transcendent thing, but as this more, you know, self-effacing possibility that's around us. You know, which potentially interacts with some of these arguments about like denying people healthcare. But I do think that the neg is winning this sort of very broad claim that the affirmative, you know, on a global scale gets used by accelerationists to terminate in like deregulation, liberal interventionism. And I think this is sort of, you know, the most compelling argument in the round. The problem for me is that this is explained in a world wherein the AF spills up. I think in a different world where the 2NR does work on sort of why this interacts within this debate round, say why this is sort of a bad, you know, sort of discourse to be producing, is violent in some other way, I think I make a different decision because I don't think that the 1AR, 2AR is grappling really with the accelerationism stuff. Well, outside of the broader installation on the debt security K, which I don't think answers deregulation. But in a world where that doesn't happen and nothing spills up and everything is marginal, I am persuaded by this, the 2AR arguments that like the AF is operating on the basis of minimal solvency and has sort of like a small impact on the way in which we relate to power and turn debate on itself in this room. I think the 2AR says like, there's no uniqueness for this because we don't spill up. And when every team is like, we don't spill up and these are minimal impacts, you know, this I think makes it difficult. So I think that was, you know, compelling, but sort of broadly framed out. The other case argument about sort of crackdowns from corporations, this one I didn't find as compelling, just because I think it's insulated by the theory of power stuff. Like if they're winning that, you know, the AF is a counter gift to which the West cannot respond, which is like a line in every AF speech. And, you know, the AF is this mysterious poetry that cannot be made sense of. I think it's harder for you to win these arguments about like corporations stealing the AF for crackdown, but it's also insulated by the broader spill up problems. So I know I rambled a lot, but TLDR, very good debate. I think the AF's ahead on T in winning some of these university arguments, and that these broader concerns about spill up sort of insulate them. So I vote on a minimal risk of AF solvency.
Do you want to go or I can?
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay. All right. Yeah, good debate, everyone. I actually came very close to writing a ballot almost exactly the same as Nick's, and I ended up not, which I guess, yeah, I'll just go through my ballot. So I voted negative on presumption. I think the affirmative is ahead on some disadvantages to the negatives interp on the framework page. In particular, you're definitely winning this argument about like complicity in university structures, since I think it was like mostly dropped by the 2NR. Like you have some responses, but I don't think they're all that great for the reasons that Nick said. However, since everyone is conceding that like the only thing that matters is what happens in this room and nothing gets exported out of it, ultimately I'm just unsure of what my ballot itself would be able to do to resolve any of that. Basically, I don't think you have a good enough of a ballot key warrant. What I do have is kind of what Nick mentioned, this argument about like symbolically injecting death, basically like the AF, into the debate to somehow force a reckoning with complicity in university structures. I think that's extended, but I don't think you're responsive to this argument on the case page that like that injection already happened as of the 1AC, like the reading of poetry, the reading of the affirmative, etc., and has in past spaces, so that doesn't really tie into my decision as much, which means there's no real reason that I need to give my ballot to resolve that. So that reckoning with the university would have already occurred as a result of the injection that happened as of the reading of the 1AC. I think that's consistent throughout the negative speeches and implicates like most of the offense that you try to go for on framework. So basically I conclude that, yeah, you already forced a reckoning with university by reading the 1AC. Since my ballot doesn't do anything, I vote for the team that is advocating for less change from the status quo, i.e. presumption, for the negative. Where I differ from Nick on this part of the decision, I guess, is like, I'm not really sure why the ballot forces complicity. Like, I think the warrant that you have in the 1AR and the 2AC is like the AF, but I think you need to be more responsive to this argument about like, why just already reading it didn't solve that. And I think any other warrant that you have is just kind of new in the 2AR. Like, ironically, I also agree with Nick. I thought it was a mistake to not have like framework as a model of debate argument, but it ended up helping you for me in this debate because, or else I probably would have just written a neg ballot for like your model of debate is exported and it's bad because like university structures, and I think that, you know, implicates all your clash offense and stuff. But so that actually ended up helping you, even though I didn't expect it to. I did think about this conditional picks argument for a bit. I like pretty much agree with Nick here. I don't think you're answering this argument that the promise wasn't that they wouldn't kick out of it. The promise was that it was conditional, so they didn't break any promise. I also want to add, I think it's kind of hard to like reckon with what the impact to this argument is when you're describing it in terms of like legislators breaking promises to Black people, and you're also saying nothing spills out outside of this round. So I'm not sure what the impact in debate is or how my ballot would resolve like white fluidity. So my advice for the affirmative, I would have liked some of the examples from the top of the 1AR about like May 68, Black Mirror or whatever to make their way into the 2AR. Nick's making a face, I guess he doesn't agree. I just like May 68, I studied it for my thesis, I guess. But also just more of a connection of that to like what this looks like or does in this debate round specifically, I think would help me come much closer to an affirmative ballot. Yeah, and similar to that, like you're doing a lot of explanation of the AF and even the framework impacts outside of the debate, even though you're conceding that like it's only about what's in this room. So like talk more about what my ballot does to endorse the AF like in debate itself. Also, just a little note, and I'll talk about this a bit when I talk about the negative comments, but make sure the 1AR responds to like this, I think like psychoanalysis argument on framework. I honestly thought like that was going to be the 2NR. I don't think the straight turn was explained in that context. I think that would have been really dangerous.
Yeah,
so
I thought the whole 2NR was going to be psychoanalysis.
Yeah. My advice for the negative, you're split between presumption and framework a bit too much, and I don't know. I think it causes some under coverage on the framework flow. I would just maybe pick more of one, honestly. And like I kind of just said, I think the ideal 2NR would have just been to go for this Berg evidence as an impact. I think you have like the psychoanalytic argument about how the AF would reify the structures they try to implode, deals with like the university stuff, even if you don't answer it, as well as like the other impact turn. And it's like risk of independent offense about submitting oneself further to authority that, yeah, I just don't think the 1AR handles it.
To briefly bounce off at that point, I think the ideal 2NR in a world where you're like, didn't answer the university dissad, or maybe just in general, given that sort of the AF is everyone's conceding these no spill ups, is just go like psychoanalysis as an impact turn, right? And then presumption. Like, I think that's a very hard 2AR.
Yeah, I don't, okay, I'm glad someone else agrees, because I was like, maybe I just like it because like I read a bunch of these arguments when I was reading Zizek and Edgy a few years ago, but yeah.
Yeah, I agree with that psychoanalysis stuff. I agree with the last judge. Pretty much decided the debate in a very similar way. I'll be brief. The theme for my decision is 1AR, 2AR disjunct. There's a lot of stuff that's in the 1AR and explanations in the 1AR that are not in the 2AR or are explained differently and in a confusing way in the 2AR. So the first thing I'll talk about is the conditional picks argument. The 1AR impact, it would pathologize people of color. The 2NR response about the nature of promise. Everybody's talked about this. I saw it the same way. Seems as a function as absolute defense. It would be, I would vote on this. I'd be happy to vote on this. It just need to be more of a feature in the 1AR because the way that it's impacted in the 2AR is, in my mind, new. The next thing I thought about was the anarchist news evidence. And as I'm reading this evidence, I'm trying to figure out how voting affirmative resolves it, how it's unique, how it uniquely links to the negative. And again, I think there's a 1AR, 2AR disjunct here because the state as a site of social condition. It seems like an argument. That's the argument. That's how it's extended in the 1AR state as a site of social condition. So it seems like it's an argument against the TVA. And the example in the 1AR is about like the construction of laptops. The 2AR example is about tournament staff. And I'm just kind of confused on what I'm supposed to do with it in the context of all the other arguments that are floating around. And as a quick aside, I went to look at this like on the website and it's no longer at the web address in the citation, just FYI, for both teams reading, because both teams read evidence from it and that web address is dead. So just a heads up. It's not a huge deal. I'm sure it's floating around out there somewhere, but so I was just trying to figure out how to vote on this because I think it's probably the way that I do vote on affirmative. And I just couldn't figure out how like voting affirmative resolves any of this stuff, what the differential between like, you know, being situated in the university is between the AF and the neg, how it impacts some of the arguments on framework. And like goes back to this like exportability thing that the last judge was talking about. Then I thought about the N+1 counterinterpretation or the permutation counterinterpretation, whatever you want to call it. I thought that it was scary in the 2NR because I thought that the negative team was going to drop this, but they ended up answering it. And it wasn't like, their argument wasn't that it was arbitrary. Their argument was that it doesn't solve the limits because there's no boundary on injecting mystery. And a less great argument, but I'm not sure what the answer is to it, is that there can only be one interpretation. I'm not sure why the counterinterpretation can't be the one interpretation. That argument's kind of bad. So anyway, in summation, I think that the clash and limits offense and the counterinterpretation outweighs the affirmative offense to the interp. And I think there's, I didn't talk about the thing that I should have talked about first, which is the 2NR law evidence, the no spill up argument. I've never conceptualized the no spill up argument as you can't think that you can't like consider spill up. I think the argument was, I conceptualized the argument as like, because nothing spills up, that complicates your ability to solve and effectuate things. So I think it cuts against the AF impacts because I'm not sure what the in-round impacts were. The last judge kind of talked about this. And I think there's a little bit of external offense in this law evidence. So I think that the short version is I think there's more risk in voting affirmative than negative. Another way that you can conceptualize this, I suppose, is the way that the last judge put it, which is that I vote for the least amount of change, which would be, I suppose you could call it presumption. I think that there's a small risk of offense in the law evidence, but it was never contextualized to the debate. And so if everything is framed out in terms of no spill up, it's like, what is that offense anyway? So I think this is a super narrow debate. And something else that was wrong with the anarchist news evidence, sorry, is all the stuff that would say that you do solve it was after the mark. So that was a problem. And then another problem, which was not as big of a problem, but all of the good stuff in the brassier evidence for the neg team, also after the mark. So, you know, be careful of that. It kind of stinks to like go for a piece of evidence and be like, hey, yeah, I know what this evidence says. It's great. And then we're like, you know, it actually doesn't say that because you didn't read all of it. So I think that if the anarchist news evidence wasn't marked, I think maybe then I'm just like, oh yeah, clearly the AF resolves all this stuff. But based on the deployment explanation of the evidence in the debate, I can't figure it out myself. So yeah, that's what I got.
What's the best answer to anarchist news? Is it just like AF doesn't solve the
I think
impacts?
you should make. I mean, you can make that, but like, you know, just sort of stock university arguments. I think like, I don't know, the anarchist news evidence fetishizes spaces outside of debate as somehow free from this exploitation. You know, there's second, their attempt to sort of cleave a distinction between inside and outside of debate, you know, is like, if everything's science, there's no particular reason why this is unique. And then, I don't know if you want to, yeah, I think that like just something like that is a good starting point. And then like a defense of, you know, like debate trains people, like I mean, I broadly think that the negative would benefit from sort of like a more robust defense of like debate trains people, and those skills and, you know, critical thinking is like can have an impact. Like, I don't know, I'm not up on these examples after like Neil Katyal fell from grace, but like something in that sort of vein.
Yeah, I would say either A, like I think you can go hard on this like Berg psychoanalysis stuff if you really want to go that route. Just be like their attempt to transgress university structures by forcing us to recognize our own complicity paradoxically requires us to have a psychic investment in those structures and uphold them, like that type of thing. Or like, yeah, that transgression is an expected response to the university and is taken in to uphold the law of the father. Or just like more, if you're gonna go for like this clash stuff, I mean, more just like debate is good, the university is good. There might be just be like, you know, there's some social death, some people find social life within the university. There's lots of cool things we can do with it. Scholarship is good for effectuating policy change or whatever, you know.
Thank you so much. We have to get going for the next round, and two of the judges in here do as well. But thank you for all your comments. We really appreciate it.
Good luck, Michigan.
See you there. Bye bye, and great.